Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome an accomplished professional with a deep understanding of mental health from Hong Kong, Stephanie Ng. Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Ashutosh. It's a pleasure, and I'm very excited to share some stories.
Thank you. Stephanie is the founder and chief executive officer of Body Banter. She's also an author, and all of you know I'm very partial to authors. She's an author of a book titled Big Bites Break Boundaries, which is a memoir that recounts her personal experiences with an eating disorder and her personal professional experiences in Hong Kong's mental health landscape. So, Stephanie, before we talk about body banter and mental health, a few questions for you. Tell me about your journey and what was the inspiration to begin sharing your story so openly?
Yeah, thanks for that. And it's a great place to begin. I think my professional journey, whether it's been in academia or in mental health advocacy, really started from my own experiences. So it all started when I started to struggle with an eating disorder in my teen years. I grew up here in Hong Kong. And for those of you who have been to Hong Kong, maybe grew up here or lived here for a while, or in the broader Asian region, might relate to the fact that it is quite difficult to broach conversations about mental health.
Absolutely.
And more particularly mental illness in Asian contexts. It's not easy to talk about how we feel, and it's even more difficult to say that we're not feeling well mentally and emotionally. And so what I found at the start of my journey was that I actually didn't recognize that I had an eating disorder until I was on the brink of death. And this was when I was sitting in a GP's office, and the GP said, you know, those symptoms, those physical symptoms that you have right now are not due to a physical condition. I think it's best that you go see a psychologist for this. And that was the first time then that I started to understand that psychological conditions, mental illnesses in particular for me, was something that could really interfere with my life in a significant way, not just as something that affected me, but also created stigma around me that would then create a sense of shame were I to share it, let's say with loved ones, even the closest ones to us. But eventually I started to share my story. It was actually a project in high school. And I was very lucky to have gone to a school that was very open to kind of encourage young people to share their experiences. And so I actually wrote a book. It was actually the first time I wrote a book, but this wasn't published. It was a book for a project in high school. And in this book, I shared about my personal experiences, and they were really just adapted diary entries at that point. So I think at that time, it was more just of a description of my experiences rather than an evaluation or reflection of my experiences, as I do in my memoir, Big Bites Break Boundaries.
Wow.
So yeah, I think that's when I first started to share. And from then on, I realized that sharing our experiences, and for me, what was the most powerful was actually being able to develop a skill of articulating my experiences, starting to put words to things that I thought were unspeakable, and watching other people resonate with that, starting to see that when I shared my experiences, I also opened a doorway for other people to have permission almost to feel that they could see a role model for that kind of sharing.
That's amazing. You know, if it's often been said that if you decide to make yourself vulnerable, the other people are willing to become vulnerable, and you seem to have demonstrated it, not just yourself, but by writing your book. But tell me, writing your book must have been a very deeply personal experience. What was the most challenging and the most rewarding part of putting your story on paper?
Yeah, I think when I started writing the book, it really was, I didn't expect to start writing a book. That's the short way to put it. At the start, I was actually considering different formats for presenting my experiences. By the time that I had started to compile my experiences or my writings in my notes app, it was literally all of these, separate notes on my iPhone. And then I was just thinking to myself, should I create a blog, or should I create, maybe I could create a separate series of reels, or maybe a podcast. So these were all things that were being considered. I was just considering the format at that point. But then I reflected back at one of the early stages of eating disorder recovery for me. And one of the things that really, really helped me was reading other people's books. And there was something about holding just a paperback or hard copy of a book and being able to scribble through it, write in the margins and highlight. That was something that was very special to me. And I know that writing has always been an outlet for me, regardless of whether it's been a good or a bad time in my life. And so I just decided, hey, what is there to lose? Absolutely. I might as well give it a shot. And so I decided to write a book. I would say the most challenging things about writing the book was actually putting it into a coherent piece. Because as I was saying, it really was just all these different pieces of my experience that I was trying to put together. But if you do decide to read the book, and anyone out there who decides to do that, you'll see that the way that I organize the book is explicitly messy, as I say, and it's very much a reflection of how eating disorder recovery was for me, and how I know that recovery journeys for many people are. It's less so kind of like a live stream of your experience, and much more like Polaroid snapshots of moments that maybe you suddenly just stop to reflect. Hey, I am a little bit farther along, or maybe I've backtracked a little bit, and that's okay. And that is how the recovery journey is like for many people.
Fascinating. And again, I have a lot of respect for authors, because authors have the courage to be able to put your thoughts out in the open, and then be ready to accept criticism, and of course a lot of credit as well.
Thank you. Yeah. Fantastic. Author to author.
Absolutely. Stephanie, let's now talk about body banter and mental health. You mentioned that you were sitting with your GP when you were talking about your eating disorder. But tell me, what was the spark that led you to create Body Banter, and why was it important to start this in Hong Kong?
Yeah, and this is also a great place to start talking a little bit more about the mental health landscape in Hong Kong too. I think, again, Body Banter was quite accidental in its creation. It was something at that point I had begun to do some mental health advocacy, whether it was sharing my experiences or joining, different advocacy events at school, whether it was high school or college. But then I started Body Banter as a club in my third year of college, and really just to get a sense of how other people were telling their stories and experiencing body image and eating concerns. At that point, I think because I had gone to high school in Hong Kong and then went to the US for college, I had no real concept of this kind of open sharing. I needed to see and hear more stories in order to inform my perspectives. And going to college, I started to take classes as well to explore how to talk about mental health, how to ask people about their mental health, because I was in a psychology major, and this greatly kind of invigorated my interest to try and start those conversations. So Body Banter, just to say it simply, was started as a student club. And then I took it with me throughout the different institutions that I went to. So I took it with me to my master's degree institution. And then when I graduated from my master's, I found myself back in Hong Kong because of COVID. And when I was in Hong Kong, I realized, just had a spark of a moment where I thought, Hong Kong really doesn't have many of these conversations going on. And Body Banter remains the only NGO in Hong Kong that discusses explicitly the topic of body image amongst young people. So it really is something that I'm very passionate about. And most of the youth we serve, I can absolutely see myself in them. And, they'll say to me, I'm so glad we have this kind of experience now. And the teachers will also say to us, I wish we had this kind of conversation when we were younger. So that's very, very rewarding.
Absolutely.
For me as a founder.
You're talking of teachers. I'm talking of my perspective. I'm a boomer. 68. But I was just, when I was reading about you, I was fascinated that uh, 50 years later, young people still have the same challenges of talking
Yeah,
about body image. Nothing seems to have evolved or changed in Asia. I don't know about the
it's
US
true.
much, but tell me, why do you think body image is such a challenge um, across over so many generations in our part of the world? And I'm saying our part, everything about Asia, I'm including.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of reasons,
Mm,
broadly speaking, and also within the Asian context
mm,
specifically. Broadly speaking, I think with any kind of mental health concern, it's
mm,
hard to talk about because a lot of us see it as a choice that the person is
mm,
making. It almost doesn't seem like something we should really validate
mm,
because it seems like it's the person's fault. You can
mm.
choose to
Yeah.
eat. You can choose your own behaviors, and
Mm,
that's something that might inform the
correct.
stigma that
Yeah.
surrounds mental illnesses.
Mm,
Yeah, so I think broadly speaking, a lot of times people find it difficult to understand
mm,
that underlying body image concerns and eating disorders are actually psychological mechanisms that run much deeper than the initial or the explicit symptoms that are presented. So
mm,
it's not about eating at all. It's
mm.
not about the body at all. It's not about food. And it's much more about how the person feels about
Correct.
themselves. Yeah,
Correct.
I'm sure you can resonate with
Correct.
that. So
Correct.
that's something that I think makes it difficult because
Mm,
very few people, or I think maybe more and more people now, after having gone through this very tough time during COVID, and more
mm,
people have the sense of collective empathy for
mm,
the shared difficulties we've gone through.
mm.
But I think, what I've seen is that a few people will stop to listen to what goes on that's
Yeah.
deeper than just the how are you or
Absolutely.
what they see
Mm,
on the surface.
absolutely.
Um, yeah, and one more thing to add here is specifically about why body image and eating concerns can be quite stigmatized,
Mm,
particularly in the Asian context.
correct.
And what happens is that in many Asian communities, and I'll speak more specifically to Chinese societies, like let's
Hmm.
say in Hong Kong, and eating is a collective activity.
Correct.
It's an activity where people bond. It's meant to be a space where people kind of contribute and kind of uh, converse and have a good time. And when you become isolated from that, maybe you reject food,
Yeah.
maybe you have a secretive relationship with
Mm,
food, maybe you can't really kind of engage in these kinds of collective activities,
mm,
you really do become an outlier, or you become perceived as an outsider in the culture. So I think that could be another reason. And
fascinating.
it's something that, yeah, the research is
What a
also
great
suggesting.
response. What a great response. Thank you. But tell me, what are some of the most powerful or surprising things you have heard from the
Hmm.
youth you work with?
I think something that is both surprising and empowering and encouraging is that young people are a lot more tuned in
Mm,
to the mental health stressors that they are being affected by than we think, or we give them credit for even. I think a lot of times for people who educate or go into schools or work with young people, there is an assumption that they don't know better
mm,
and they don't know what's good for them. And that's why they are susceptible to these negative influences, say
mm,
social media or comparison on social media specifically.
mm, mm,
But what I've seen is that young people they may struggle with these concerns, but all young people do. You can have all the knowledge in the world about what's harmful and
yeah.
still be susceptible to it.
Mm,
And I think what's different about young people is that they are willing to confront it and reflect on it.
mm,
And it's great to see that young people are also taking initiative to start clubs and initiatives to promote mental health awareness, even
mm,
as they may be struggling or they have struggled. So
mm,
this is something that's quite crucial and has been very encouraging for me to watch as
mm,
well. Yeah.
mm. Amazing. But I'd also love to get your perspective on how do you see the conversations around body image and mental health changing among the younger
Mm.
generations as compared to older ones as you do so much more work with them.
Yeah, I think what I see is that maybe I'll just give an example of a conversation I had with a year group, or it was an assembly with a large group of students. And we were actually talking about body image comments. And maybe you or a younger person in your life may have experienced like receiving a comment from a relative, you know,
all the time.
them saying,
all the time.
"Oh, you've grown fatter," or "You've gained weight," or "Why have you gained weight?" And
stop slouching.
Stop slouching. Why don't you have kids yet? You know, all these kinds of comments and judgments about your life, and it feels unsolicited.
Correct. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that from the perspective of the person delivering the comment, it might seem to be harmless. They might think that it's an offhanded comment. And that's where I start to think about the generational differences. And it could also just not be generational, I think. It's just one of the facets of difference that I often see in older versus younger generations that I have worked with. And this is just more awareness on the part of the younger generation of how body image comments, or maybe just generally unsolicited comments, things that are well-intentioned, they might not land the way that you intend them to. And there's more of a perspective taking, I would say, on the part of young people to acknowledge that, hey, you know, what a parent, a relative said to me may have been well-intentioned, but it does actually hurt. And so when I speak to others and maybe thinking about the next generation, there's more of a forward thinking of maybe I do have to check myself. And that's something I have observed amongst young people, of this perspective taking, of this awareness of how others might feel towards these kind of more sensitive topics, like body image. Yeah.
Great response. Tell me, Stephanie, how can storytelling and sharing lived experiences help to reduce the stigma around mental health?
Yeah, I talked about this at the start of the episode, and I think it's a great place to revisit it now. I always use the term lending language. It's something that I reflected on and developed over the years of my research and writing, which is this idea that when we converse with others about our mental health experiences, whether they be positive or negative, we're giving people vocabulary and conversational frameworks to begin doing that in the same ways themselves. So if we even just step back and think about the concept of stigma, where it comes from fundamentally is silence and feeling like one cannot express something that is a core part of themselves, but may have been shrouded in shame because of societal expectations for what's normal. And so when we are able to, let's say, step on a stage, it doesn't even have to be a stage, it can be with close others, a small group of close others. When we voice those things that other people may consider to be taboo or stigmatized, we start to not only give them those experiences as models for, hey, maybe I resonate with that, but it also gives them that sense of space and openness that, oh, I could share this when I'm ready as well. So lived experience, storytelling, and sharing really is so powerful because it doesn't just give people content to consider, it actually gives people frameworks for how to structure and deliver a conversation, how to participate and start conversations of a similar nature.
Amazing. You said you do go and speak to a lot of students in schools. And my question to you is, how can schools play a stronger role in promoting positive body image and mental health? Because I've generally seen children can be very, what's the right word? Unfair to one another, without even thinking.
It's true. Yeah, I think for schools to really take a proactive approach to addressing body image concerns and really not just a reactive approach. So what we often see is that once an issue happens, let's say students start to struggle, it becomes a noticeable problem in the student population, then the school will clamor and, kind of clamor to address an issue that is already there. And what I think is essential is for schools, and I think We can even speak to organizations, businesses. It's not just about young people, although it is a pivotal age for young people, in particular, to prevent or to kind of safeguard them against body image concerns. I think there are two things that come to mind. First is curriculum integration of body image education and mental health education more generally. And this cannot just be limited to teaching about concepts. It has to be relevant and practiced in the student body, that this doesn't have to be something that we only teach in classrooms. It's very sterile and separate from student life. It has to be fun in some way. Maybe it becomes a dance club where bodies are celebrated, or maybe it's an event that students run by themselves, so it's relevant for the student community. And the second part, in addition to curriculum design, is more just to also get the community involved, reach beyond the school. That's what Body Banter hopes to provide. Just be an external provider that allows the school to kind of branch out into the community as well. So I think those are great ways to begin.
Yeah, well said. And my next question is, if a young person feels uncomfortable about their body or struggles with food, what's the first thing they should do?
That's a great question. And I wish I had a straightforward answer to this. I think over the course of my years, and maybe I could say, if I look back at myself and what I would have done, or given myself a piece of advice about this at the start of my recovery journey, I would actually say to branch out beyond the realm of food and body. And that's the first place that I would go. Because what is the central pathology of many eating disorders is that the person's world becomes narrowed to just focus on food and body as a sense of self-worth. And what really, really helped me at the start of my mental health recovery journey was actually reaching out to friends, getting back involved in hobbies, just remembering that I am not a kind of a single faceted person. And I have lots and lots of different things that contribute and give richness to my life. So that's where I would start, as kind of an all-encompassing, more general, broader perspective, so to speak, that a young person can start with. Just branch out and see the color that is actually in your life. And of course, if you are really struggling, seek help. Do not wait until you are in crisis. Never wait until you are in crisis. That's the strongest thing.
Very well said. Very well said. Stephanie, I have time for two more questions for you. You worked across local and international platforms. What differences do you notice in conversations about body image around the world?
I think a misconception about body image conversations in Hong Kong is that they don't exist, or that people don't talk about it at all. And this isn't true. In fact, I grew up with many body image conversations, but many of them were negative. And I think this is a shared experience amongst many of my peers as well. And I think what's essential, just speaking to the Hong Kong context first, is that we simply need to adjust and pivot the direction of these conversations, not to bash or to kind of shut down the existing perspectives, but more so to say, hey, have you considered another way of talking about body image? And so, that's the Hong Kong piece of it. And speaking of the differences, perhaps that we see in the international landscape, it's more so about the tone in which these conversations are carried out. So I've worked with organizations in Canada, Australia, the US, and by far, I think most of them that I've worked with there are more organizations or conversations that take an empowering tone. There are practices of lived experience storytelling. So there are people sharing their stories of recovery or struggling with mental health concerns or body image concerns more specifically. And so even though people do struggle in every context that I've worked with, perhaps there are more pathways for expression. And that's truly something I think is essential to bring to Hong Kong as well. Just pathways for describing and expressing.
Very interesting. And my last question, how has your work with Body Banter been received outside Hong Kong? And have you collaborated with any international organizations?
Yeah, so I've worked with a couple of different international media platforms to discuss body image and eating disorders specifically in the Hong Kong context, like the BBC, Channel News Asia, Tatler Asia. And these are organizations that have just been interested to explore the cultural nuances of body image and eating disorders in the Hong Kong context. And then I've also worked with the Alliance for Eating Disorders in the US, and that's more specifically, I would say, advocacy in that that realm of that topic. And so, yeah, I've had quite a lot of experiences, and with Body Banter's work, I think what takes a lot of or captures interest internationally is more of the cultural nuance, the culturally specific nature of my work, and how I put emphasis, and this is something I feel very strongly about, that culture strongly influences the ways that we perceive and we converse, articulate our perspectives about mental health and mental illness. Yeah.
Yeah. And on that note, Stephanie, I just want to say what an amazing conversation this has been.
For sure. It was so fun.
You've spoken so honestly and frankly about your own challenges, but more importantly, the messages that you have sent out throughout our conversation is how important it is for us to understand our own bodies, talk about our challenges, if necessary, make ourselves vulnerable, because there is an answer which is lying within us. And our friends, our associates are our probably biggest support system, in addition, of course, to Body Banter. Thank you again for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
You as well, Ashutosh. Have a great day, and thank you to our audience for tuning in as well.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.